Okay, good morning, everyone. So we are going to finish out our book today. This is chapter 86. Don't forget to make sure that you have all of your discussion questions done and this book tied up. I hope that you've enjoyed it. Okay, we're on chapter 86, The Flight. Sitting on the pavement, glinting in the sun, was a sleek white airship. For so long, those white ships had filled the robot with dread. Now, one was about to solve all of her problems. The door hummed open to Dr. Movado. Roz and Bright Bill climbed aboard. Once they were comfortable, the woman spoke to the airship. "Take us to the island where our Zoom Unit 7134 was found." The engines fired up and the ships lifted off. It floated high into the air, turned to the north, and started cruising above the city. The three of them quietly watched the buildings and streets pass below. The city seemed to go on forever, but as they flew faster and further, it slowly gave way to towns and countryside. They crossed the hard edge of the coastline, and then there was only the ocean and the sky and the airship. The ocean was deep. However, scattered through the dark depths were shallow areas, sandbars, reefs, islands just under the waves. In places, bizarre rock formations stuck up from the shallows, or were they ruins of old buildings? The mysterious shapes faded behind the airship and were replaced by more dark depths. The ship flew on, and the hours flew by. Gradually, fluffy clouds came into view on the edge of the horizon. Beneath the clouds was a faint smudge of green. The island. It grew closer and bigger, and then Roz was gazing out at all the places she'd missed. The rocky shore, the mountain and the waterfall, the forest and the meadows and the ponds. Air blasted toward the ground as the ship lowered itself into a grassy clearing. It gently touched down. The engines powered off. Chapter 87, The Homecoming. The airship's door hummed open, and our robot stepped outside. Everything was still and silent, but Roz knew that hidden animals were watching, and she greeted them with a mighty roar. "Animals of the island, I have returned. I may look different, but I promise you, I am your old friend Roz." Her words boomed across the island, but the only response was her own voice echoing back. The wild robot needed to be wilder, so she reached down and started smearing handfuls of mud across her body. Then she pressed clumps of weeds and flowers into her muddy coating until she looked more like her old wild self. Bright Bill fluttered out from the airship and perched on Roz's shoulder. He took his tail feathers and squawked, "It's true! This robot is my mother! Come see for yourselves!" Silence. And then bushes began to rustle. Faces began poking out from the trees. Animals began scurrying and trotting and flying into the meadows. At first they moved cautiously, confused as to how this new robot could be their old friend. But they saw her wild appearance, and they heard her wild voice, and news began spreading across the island. Roz was back. A crowd of friendly creatures gathered around our robot. There was Bright Bill's flock, and the beaver and the deer families, and Fink the fox, and Swooper the owl. Bears came lumbering down the hills, and fish jumped out from the ponds, and vultures circled above. Even the nocturnal creatures crawled out from their burrows into daylight and to join the celebration. Oh, how good it feels to return from a long journey and find your friends and family waiting for you. But reader, sometimes we return to find that things aren't exactly as we left them. As you know, the wilderness can be a harsh place, and while Roz was away, it had claimed its share of her friends. The robot saw the raccoons Lumpkin and Bumpkin, but not Rumpkin. Nor did she see Broadfoot, the moose, or Digs down the groundhog. Other creatures were missing as well. And so, like many of our homecomings, this one was bittersweet. Chit-Chat the squirrel came bounding through the grass, chattering on and on as usual. "I always knew you'd come back to us, Roz, but I never imagined you'd gain so much weight, although I guess I've gained a little weight myself. Anyway, you'll have to tell me about all your adventures when you get a chance. I'm sorry for talking so much. I'm just so excited to see you again." Geese and beavers and deer and fish and squirrels and owls and bears and turtles and otters and raccoons and woodpeckers and opossums and moose and foxes and every kind of creature from every corner of the island were coming to welcome back their dear friends, Roz and Bright Bill. And watching it all from the airship was Dr. Malavo. Chapter 88, The Final Farewell. "Everyone, I would like you to meet the woman." Ooh, All right, let me start this chapter over again. I'm sorry I'm recording at home and my puppies are not cooperating. Okay, chapter 88, the final farewell. Everyone, I would like you to meet the woman who designed me. Roz walked over to the strange creature standing by the ship's doorway. For most of the island animals, this was their first time seeing a human. They squinted and stiffed and whispered to each other, trying to understand how such a frail old woman could create such a big, strong robot. Dr. Malavo started speaking softly to Roz, and then Roz started speaking loudly to the crowd of animals. My designer has asked me to translate her words for you, said the robot. The following words are not mine, they are hers. The crowd settled down and listened. Thank you, island animals, for saving Roz. Without your help, she would have died here long ago. But you were not only her rescuers, you were also her teachers. You taught her to be wild, and she needed all of your wilderness to survive, both in your world and in mine. As I looked around at this wild paradise, I finally understand why Roz tried so hard to get back here. She does not belong with robots and humans. She belongs here on the island with all of you. We cannot risk others learning about this place. That is why I will soon leave and never return. But I promise to keep your island a secret so that all of you can live in peace. And I will spend the rest of my days filled with wonder at the miracle that this is our wild robot. The meadow fell silent. A flurry of wing beats and Brightbill landed in the grass near Dr. Malavo. He gazed up at the woman, deep into her eyes, and then he bowed his head. Then the other geese in his flock bowed their heads. Crown Point, the buck, bowed his head. Pinktail, the opossum, bowed. Mr. and Mrs. Beaver bowed. The lizards bowed, followed by the turtles and the frogs. Like a wave rolling through the crowd, more animals bowed until every head was lowered. They were showing respect for the woman who had created their dear friend Roz and who had brought her back to them. Dr. Malavo turned to Roz. Do you understand why I can't return? She said, her eyes glistening. It's for your own good. I understand, said the robot. I only wish that we had gotten to know each other a little better. Dr. Malavo smiled and pulled Roz into a hug. She didn't mind the robot's coat and mud and grass. Wrapped in each other's arms, they both felt something like love. You're the wild robot, said the woman. Go be wild. Chapter 89, The Departure. Dr. Malavo stepped aboard her airship, and the door hummed closed. A moment later, the engines fired up, and the crowd of wild creatures backed away. Then the ship rose above the island, turned to the south, and disappeared into the sky. In Chapter 90, The Island. Our story ends on an island, where a robot was returning to her wild way of life. Roz had escaped from the world of humans, and now she was free to be her true self again. She could think and speak and do whatever she desired. And right now, what she desired was simply to watch the sunset. With Brightbill on her shoulder, Roz hiked past trees and meadows and streams and climbed up, up, up to the mountain, to the very highest point of the island. Then her friend sat on the slanted rock to the peak and watched the sun slowly sink behind the... Now, if you're like me, reader, you still have a lot of questions. How long will Roz live? Will she ever see another human or another robot? What joys and sorrows lie ahead for her? Roz still had some questions too, but now she also had some answers. Our robot knew where she came from. She knew that she knew the life that she was supposed to live, and she knew the life that she wanted to live. As Roz sat with Brightbill, she slowly turned her head, scanning the island, taking it all in. The last rays of sunlight streaked across the treetops below. Animals scurried through the shadows. The air was fresh and the scent of flowers and of salt water. The sky was darkening. The crickets began chirping. The stars began twinkling. Everything was just right. Roz felt safe and happy and loved. The wild robot was home. Wow, what an adventure. Okay, this is the epilogue. So autumn had returned to Hilltop Farm. The pasture was coated with frost, but the cows were out there, grazing on the last few tufts of fresh grass. Soon they'd stroll up to the parlor for another milking. Their routine never changed. Mr. Sharif was sitting in his pickup truck with his dog. The man stared out the window across the fields at the new robot. He was keeping a close eye on her. Tech Lab had promised him that this one wouldn't run away, but he didn't trust her yet. These days, the children spent most of their free time working on the farm. Jaya had a way with the cows. Jade liked the tools and the machines. They were walking through the farm buildings together when they heard honking sounds in the sky, and a flock of geese glided down to the pond. For weeks, geese had been stopping by on their migrations. But there was something different about this flock. They flew in perfect formation, and they were led by a small, graceful goose. The flock calmly floated on the water. After a while, the leader shook his tail feathers, beat his wings, and fluttered over to Jaya and Jade. The goose stood in front of the children. He gazed deep into their eyes. Then he craned his neck around, plucked out one of his feathers, and laid it on the ground by their feet. Jaya and Jade looked at each other and smiled. The children had been waiting for this moment. They always wanted to know how Roz's story would end. And now they finally knew. The wild robot was back where she belonged. Here's a note about this story. What would an intelligent robot do stranded in the wilderness? How might a robot adapt to the natural environment? Could a robot ever be truly wild? Those are some of the questions that inspired me to create a character named Roz and to write my first novel for children, The Wild Robot. But I had more questions. What would happen if Roz were taken away from the wilderness? How might the wild robot react to normal robots and to humans? Could she ever fit into the civilized world? The questions kept coming, and yet there was one question that I returned to again and again. Where does the wild robot truly belong? Does Roz belong on the island where she spent her first year of life? Or does she belong in civilization, working for humans alongside other robots? I imagined her feelings torn between the natural world and the civilized world. I also imagined, if given the choice, Rod would choose to live with her wild animal friends and family. But would she have a choice? Obviously, I needed to explore these ideas by writing a sequel in which Roz finds her way back home. The story had to be filled with heart and soul and action and science and even a little philosophy. I had to develop new characters and settings, and everything had to take place in the future, of course. This new story was tricky, like a puzzle where all the pieces had to fit together perfectly in order for the whole thing to work. I read expert predictions of what our future might look like. I studied robotics and animation and artificial intelligence. I began to envision a futuristic society where humans live comfortably thanks to the tireless work of robots. And there was Roz, in the middle of that society, using her wilderness in new ways to escape from her new life and return to her old one. The puzzle pieces started fitting together, and after several years of researching and thinking and writing and illustrating, I finally had my second novel for children, The Wild Robot Escapes. All right, wanted to read to you some acknowledgments again from the writer. Creating The Wild Robot Escapes was a real labor of love, and it wouldn't have happened without the support of the entire constellation of people. I'd like to mention some of them. Susan Fang was my art assistant and did much of the drudgery that comes with my particular illustration technique. I'm not sure what I would have done without her. Jill Yeomans is still completely overqualified to be my administrative assistant. That's a fancy word for secretary. Wisely, I'm still taking advantage of her assistance as long as it lasts. Paul Rodin had been my literary agent since both of our careers began. I'd say things have worked out quite well. My publisher, Little Brown and Company, remained patient and understanding with me, even when I couldn't meet the original deadline. They gave me an extra 6 months, and I needed all of that time to polish the story. They also provided me with a team of incredibly talented professionals who each played an important role in the book's publication. That team includes Nicole Brown, Karen Callender, Jackie Ingle, Sean Foster, Jen Graham, Sienna Constal, Emily Polster, Carl Scalata, Jessica Scholl, Victoria Stapleton, Megan Tingley, and Ricky Tungwala. David Kaplan was the creative director on both Wild Robot books, which was a dream because he's one of the best. Evelina Ling was the perfect temperament for an editor. While I was losing my mind, frantically trying to get this story just right, she calmly kept me on track. The research for this book was considerable, and I enjoyed every moment of it. The following people were especially generous with their time and insight. Becky and Jill Fulham at Old Ford Farm gave me a glimpse into the life of a farming family. Jim Shockley toured me around Ronnybrook Farms and answered all of my dairy questions. Eric Stera let me join him on the harvested corn in the massive combine harvester. Gabriel Umpetstein gave me a behind-the-scenes look at the robots being developed at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. To all who have helped and tolerated me as I wrote this book, thank you. And thank you, Mrs. Runyon, for having your students read it. I don't think they wrote that. Okay, make sure you do your discussion questions, and you guys have a good day.